mechanic with motor oil still dark under his fingernails, a glass tower CEO who had never once been told no, and one sealed folder that could collapse a $280 million deal before the ink ever touched paper. When Wesley Greer walked through the revolving doors of Kroft Automotive Holdings with his 8-year-old son at his side, he had roughly 90 seconds before lobby security would decide he didn't belong there. He knew this the moment the filtered air hit him. Cool and faintly metallic, the kind of clean that cost money to maintain. His work jacket was canvas, faded at the shoulders from years of crawling under chassis. There was a smear of gear oil on his left wrist that the gas station washroom hadn't quite managed to remove. Luca had noticed it on the drive from Maple Creek and asked if it was a bruise. It wasn't. It was just the job. The lobby of Kroft's Calgary headquarters ran the full length of the building's ground floor, polished concrete and recessed lighting, and a reception desk that looked more like a judicial bench. Behind it sat a man in a fitted gray shirt whose expression landed somewhere between bored and suspicious the moment Wesley and Luca came through the doors. Luca pressed against Wesley's leg. He was small for 8, with his mother's dark eyes and a quiet way of observing things before he spoke. He was carrying his notebook, a small green thing with a rubber band around it, never far from his hands since Joanna had died. "I need to speak with Vanessa Kroft," Wesley said, stopping in front of the desk. The receptionist's eyes tracked downward, canvas jacket, work-worn jeans, the child, back to the jacket. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's about the Torrance Division sale, the signing today." Something flickered across the man's face. Not much, a tightening around the corners of the mouth. "Monsieur Kroft's calendar is closed this morning. If you have business with Kroft Holdings, you'll need to contact our executive office to schedule." "I'm a trustee," Wesley said, "of the Greer Family Trust, and according to the original partnership agreement from 1994, any disposition of assets valued above $40 million in a company where the trust holds equity requires trustee consent. You're about to sell the Torrance division for $280 million. He kept his voice level. "Without my signature, that deal has no legal standing." The receptionist blinked, typed something, looked at the screen for a long moment. "Sir, I don't have you listed as a..." "I'm aware of that. That's why I'm here in person." The man picked up his desk phone, spoke quietly into it, set it down. "Security to reception, please." Wesley had expected this. He'd told himself on the 4-hour drive from Maple Creek that he was ready for it. The dismissal, the scripted politeness that would curdle into something harder the moment he didn't move. But he hadn't factored in the way Luca's hand would tighten around the folder he was carrying for his father. Hadn't factored in the way his son's knuckles would go white. 2 men appeared from a door set into the far wall, built wide, moving with the particular ease of people who'd done this before and found it simple. "This gentleman was just leaving," the receptionist said. The closer guard stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. I have legal standing here." Wesley didn't move. 5 minutes with Vanessa Kroft is all I'm asking." "Mrs. Kroft is in a meeting." "I know, the Torrance signing. That's why I drove 4 hours to be here." The guard put a hand on Wesley's shoulder, not hard, but with the clear suggestion that hard was available. Luca made a small sound. Wesley looked down at him. His son was watching the guard's hand with the kind of absolute stillness that children fell into when they were trying very hard not to cry. Wesley had seen that look before. The night the paramedics came for Joanna. The morning of the funeral, in the pew, when Luca realized he was supposed to stand but couldn't figure out how. "Okay," Wesley said quietly, "we're going." He let them steer him toward the doors. Luca walked at his side, saying nothing, his small hands now gripping the folder with both arms. Then the elevator chimed. Wesley glanced back. The woman who stepped out moved like someone who had decided long ago that hesitation was a form of weakness. Late 40s, dark hair swept back, a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than Wesley's truck. She was mid-conversation with a younger man carrying a leather portfolio, talking about finalization timelines and regulatory sign-off from Alberta Transport. Vanessa Kroft. She was exactly as she appeared in the handful of photos Wesley had found online, precise and contained and entirely certain of every step she took. "Miss Kroft," Wesley's voice cut across the lobby, not loud, but clear. She stopped. The man beside her stopped. The guard stopped. For a moment, the whole lobby held its breath. Kroft's eyes found Wesley. She did the same assessment the receptionist had done. Jacket, jeans, the child, the folder, and her expression didn't shift so much as compact. "Who are you?" Her voice was measured. "Wesley Greer. I need 3 minutes of your time." "We're managing the situation, Miss Kroft," the guard said. She looked at him briefly, then back at Wesley. "What situation?" "This gentleman doesn't have an appointment, and—" "He just told me his name. I asked him what he wants." She walked closer, heels clicking across the concrete. "Mr. Greer, 3 minutes is a short time to ask for. What is it you need to say?" "That you're about to sign a deal that will expose Kroft Holdings to significant legal liability. Your CFO has a financial relationship with the buyer he hasn't disclosed, and the Torrance division is being sold at less than 40 cents on the dollar." Wesley held her gaze. "I have documentation, and I have legal authority to halt the transaction until you look at it." Something moved behind Kroft's eyes. Not belief, not yet, but something that hadn't been there a second ago. "On what basis?" she asked. "My grandfather co-founded the company that eventually became Kroft Holdings. In 1994, when Kroft Capital absorbed Greer Automotive Systems, my family retained a 35% equity stake held in trust. The trust agreement gives the controlling trustee veto authority over any asset sale above $40 million. Wesley reached toward Luca. His son, understanding, extended the folder. "It's all in here, along with what I found about the Torrance sale." Kroft studied the folder. Then she looked at the guard. "Who called security?" "Reception flagged." "I didn't ask who flagged it. I asked who called you down." She let the question hang for a moment. Then, "This man has a child with him. He asked for 3 minutes." She looked back at Wesley. A long, still look. "Bring them up." The guard shifted his weight. "Miss Kroft, our protocol has now been updated." She turned and walked back toward the elevators. "Mr. Greer, 3 minutes." Wesley reached for the folder. Luca released it and took Wesley's free hand instead. They made it 6 steps before the wider guard moved to intercept. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I still need to verify." "Then verify." Kroft's voice didn't rise, it simply landed. "But do it after he's upstairs." The guard hesitated, made a decision, stepped aside. In the elevator, Kroft stood at the front, back to the doors, watching Wesley and Luca without seeming to. The portfolio man, she'd called him Derek, was reading something on his phone with the careful focus of someone who wanted very badly to be somewhere else. Luca was quiet. He was drawing in his notebook, the rubber band off, and tucked in his pocket, his pencil moving with the automatic calm that meant he wasn't entirely in the room anymore. "How long is the drive from Maple Creek?" Kroft asked. Wesley glanced at her. 4 hours, give or take." She nodded once, said nothing else. The elevator opened onto a floor that smelled of fresh coffee and new carpet. A boardroom waited at the end of the hall. Wesley could see through the glass wall. A long walnut table, 6 people, documents spread across the surface. A man in a navy suit stood near the window, checking his phone. Roland Spears. Wesley recognized him from the Kroft Holdings annual report he'd found online at 11 the previous night, sitting at the kitchen table after Luca had gone to bed. Kroft led them to a smaller side office instead, closed the door. She sat across from Wesley. Luca sat beside his father, notebook open, pencil still. "You have 2 minutes, Kroft said. Not unkind, just accurate." Wesley opened the folder. "My father was Wesley Greer Sr. He inherited the trustee role when my grandfather died. When my father passed 2 years ago, control transferred to me. I didn't know any of this existed until 72 hours ago, when a law firm called Pemberton Associates sent me a registered letter. They had a standing instruction from my grandfather. If Kroft ever moved to sell a major division, they were to notify the controlling trustee immediately." He slid 2 documents across the desk. "This is the original 1994 partnership agreement and the trust deed. Section 9, paragraph 3. Veto authority, clear language." Kroft read. She read quickly and carefully, the way people read who actually understand what they're looking at. "Why are you still working in a garage?" she asked, without looking up. Wesley had known someone would eventually ask it. "The trust has a no distribution clause," he said. "My grandfather was conservative. He believed in long positions." The trust cannot pay dividends or liquidate equity until a qualifying event. A merger, acquisition, or major asset sale above $200 million. 30 years of equity, zero income. My father knew, but he kept the trust paperwork to himself. He thought he'd explain it when I was older. He died before he got around to it. Wesley kept his voice flat. I run a garage in Maple Creek. That's what I do. This, he gestured to the folder, is not something I knew about while I was rebuilding transmissions at 6 in the morning. Kroft held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the documents. You said Roland has a relationship with the buyer. Blackridge Capital Partners. Their managing director is a man named Stuart Rideau. Wesley pulled out a second set of papers. Rideau is married to Spears' sister. They've been in-laws for 11 years. There's no conflict of interest disclosure anywhere in the Torrance sale documentation. I checked every public filing I could access. He paused. There's more. The depreciation schedule on the Torrance manufacturing equipment is wrong, not by a small margin. I spent 15 years as a senior engineer working with that generation of stamping and forming machinery. The schedule values those assets at 22 cents on the dollar. The actual serviceable value is closer to 60. Someone altered those figures. Kroft was very still. If that's true, she began. I know it is. I've run the numbers 3 times. I used to sign off on capital assessments for that class of equipment. Wesley leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Kroft, someone structured this deal so that Blackridge buys $280 million worth of assets for less than half their value. Roland Spears' family walks away with a fortune, and Kroft Holdings absorbs the loss. The silence in the room was the specific kind that follows a sentence landing somewhere it cannot be taken back. Then Kroft stood, walked to the door, opened it. Marcus. She spoke to someone in the hall. I need you to delay the signing. Tell them 20 minutes. A voice outside. Messrs. Kroft, the buyer's counsel is all ready. 20 minutes, Marcus. She came back into the room, looked at Wesley with an expression he couldn't quite read, not convinced, not disbelieving, but something more complicated than either. Show me the depreciation schedule, she said. Wesley showed her. She looked at it for a long time. Her jaw tightened. She turned to a specific page and read it twice. Then she closed the folder carefully and set it on the desk and put both hands flat on the surface. I need you to wait here, she said. Both of you. Her eyes went briefly to Luca, who had been drawing quietly throughout and had produced a surprisingly detailed sketch of the view through the office window. Is he all right? He's fine, Wesley said. He's always fine. She nodded and walked out. Luca looked up from his notebook. She's not as scary as she looked downstairs, he said. Wesley almost smiled. Give her time. What followed was not 20 minutes. It was closer to 45, and the sound that came through the wall at the 30-minute mark was raised voices. One of them Kroft's, crisp and controlled, and one of them something else entirely. A man's voice, first confident and then not. When the door opened again, Kroft came back in alone. She looked like someone who had just made a decision that would cost her significantly and had decided to make it anyway. The signing has been suspended, she said, pending a review of the asset valuation documentation and a conflict of interest audit of the transaction team. She sat down across from Wesley. Roland is denying everything. He's already called his personal lawyer. He'll deny it, Wesley said, until he can't. We'll need your cooperation for the audit. Statements, the documents you brought, access to your grandfather's trust files. She met his eyes. I'm sorry for what happened downstairs. You shouldn't have been treated that way. No, Wesley agreed. He said it without heat, just as a fact. Kroft looked at Luca again. Something in her face shifted. Where is his mother? Wesley's chest tightened in the familiar way. She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. Kroft was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Thank you. He paused. We should probably talk to your legal team. Before any of that could happen, the door opened and a man stepped in who was not Marcus. He introduced himself as Spears' personal counsel and informed Kroft, in the pleasant tones of someone delivering bad news they were enjoying, that Roland Spears would be making no statements without his legal team present and was initiating a formal complaint against Miss Kroft for wrongful interference in a board-approved transaction. The hours that followed moved with a grinding institutional speed Wesley had not anticipated. A conference room. A senior partner from Kroft's legal firm arriving downtown with a harried expression. Calls being made, documents being pulled, IT locking down Spares' email access, while Spares himself apparently sat in his corner office making his own calls. Luca sat in a chair along the wall and drew. He drew the boardroom. He drew the skyline through the window. He drew a man in a work jacket sitting across from a woman in a charcoal suit. He drew these things with the same methodical quiet he brought to everything, and nobody thought to ask him to stop. At 6 p.m, when the light outside had gone flat and gold, a woman walked into the conference room who was not from Kroft's legal team. She was 60-something, silver-haired, wearing a burgundy blazer, and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had been through several decades of hard use. Her name was Miriam Chase. She was a partner at Pemberton Associates, the firm that had sent Wesley the registered letter 3 days ago. "You should have called me before you drove to Calgary," she said, sitting across from Wesley, with the calm of someone who had seen every version of this situation before. "I didn't know if you could help." "That's what a retainer is for, Mr. Greer." She opened the briefcase. "Your grandfather retained us in 1998 with very specific standing instructions. If Kroft ever attempted a major asset sale, we were to notify the trustee and hold ourselves ready to intervene legally if necessary." She set a folder on the table. "I filed an emergency application for injunctive relief this afternoon as a precaution. The trust's legal standing is airtight. The veto provision is enforceable." Wesley stared at the folder. "My grandfather set all this up 30 years ago. He was a careful man." Miriam Chase looked at him over her glasses. He also knew what he'd built. He didn't want it dismantled quietly. The next morning brought Roland Spares' counter move. It arrived in the form of a statement to the Calgary Herald from Spares' communications team. Positioning himself as a whistleblower who had attempted to flag concerns about Kroft's leadership being manipulated by an outside trustee with a hidden agenda. The framing was clean and polished and would have been moderately convincing to anyone who hadn't seen the documents. Wesley read it at the kitchen counter of the hotel room they'd booked near headquarters, while Luca ate cereal and watched a cartoon with the volume low. His phone had begun receiving messages from an unknown number at midnight. The first said, "You don't know what you've stepped into." The second, "Smart people walk away." The third, at 3 a.m, "Think about your son." Wesley had stared at that last one for a long time. Then he'd checked the lock on the hotel room door and sat in the chair by the window until morning, watching the light change over the city. He called Miriam Chase at 8 o'clock. She answered on the first ring. "I know," she said before he finished explaining. "Forward them to me. I'm filing for a restraining order and I'm calling the RCMP non-emergency line in the next 10 minutes. A pause, and her voice changed slightly, became less clipped. "Are you and Luca all right?" "We're fine." "Good. Stay at the hotel. Don't go anywhere alone." Another pause. "He's frightened, Mr. Greer." Frightened men send threatening texts at 3 a.m. It's not a sign of strength. It's a sign that he knows exactly what those documents prove. What those documents proved became considerably clearer that afternoon, when a woman named Tara Whitlock called Miriam Chase's office. Tara had been Roland Spares' executive assistant for 7 years. She had been let go the previous afternoon, 40 minutes after Spares returned to his office, following the confrontation with Kroft. She was calling, she told Miriam Chase, because she had access to Roland's secondary email account, a personal account he'd used for communications he didn't want on the corporate server, and because she was angry enough to do something about it. She was also, it turned out, meticulous. She had saved copies of 3 months of correspondence. Wesley read through the printed summaries that evening in Miriam Chase's Calgary satellite office, while Luca slept on a leather couch in the corner under a blanket someone had produced from a closet. The emails were not subtle. They were the emails of a man who had been careful for a long time and had recently stopped feeling the need. Emails to Stuart Rideau about timing the offer to coincide with a temporary dip in Torrance's earnings. Emails about the depreciation schedule and which accounting firm would sign off on revised figures without asking questions. Emails, most damning of all, about the shell company through which Spares held a 4% stake in Blackridge Capital Partners. Purchased 18 months earlier. 3 months after the Torrance divestiture was first discussed at the board level. Miriam Chase read the last one and set it down on the table with the particular care of someone handling something fragile. He bought into the buyer before the sale was even formally proposed, Wesley said. He did. And then he steered the board toward the sale, using the same depreciated asset figures that made the price look defensible. Yes. While his brother-in-law's firm was being positioned as the preferred acquirer. Yes. Miriam Chase folded her hands. It's fraud, Mr. Greer. Securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and very likely criminal conspiracy. The RCMP's Commercial Crime Division will be interested in this. She looked at the sleeping child across the room. Your grandfather would have recognized exactly what Roland Spares was doing. He saw it tried twice in his own career. Roland Spares was arrested 11 days later on a Wednesday morning, attempting to board a flight to Vancouver with 2 checked bags and a carry-on that contained, among other things, a laptop later found to hold deleted versions of the emails Tara Whitlock had already provided. The timing was not elegant. It was the particular variety of self-defeating panic that Miriam Chase had predicted to Wesley with something approaching boredom. He found out from a news alert on his phone while he was underneath a Silverado in the garage bay at Maple Creek, checking a worn CV joint. He read the alert twice, set his phone on the creeper beside him, and lay there for a moment looking up at the undercarriage. The morning light came in at a low angle through the bay door and lit the dust in the air. Then he rolled out, wiped his hands on a rag, and went to pick up Luca from school. Vanessa Kroft called him 3 weeks later. She sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The board voted yesterday to terminate Roland's employment and refer the matter to the RCMP, she said. The Torrance sale has been canceled. We're reopening the process with independent asset valuations. A pause. I want to thank you, properly. You don't need to. I do, and I'd like to do it in a way that's practical. She named a figure. A substantial one. Wesley listened. Let the number settle. I won't take it, he said. A silence. Mr. Greer. I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm saying it because if I accept that check, the story becomes something else. It becomes a transaction. Someone found a fraud and got paid for it. He paused. I don't want Luca to grow up thinking that's what happened. Kroft was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. What do you want then? Wesley had thought about this for weeks. He'd thought about it at the kitchen table while Luca did his reading homework. He'd thought about it during the long drives between Maple Creek and Calgary, during the depositions and legal meetings. He'd thought about it the morning he drove past the old Greer Automotive Systems building on the highway, now a storage facility for a big box chain, the sign still faintly readable beneath the new paint. The Torrance division has a manufacturing plant in Bracebridge, he said. 83 workers. Most of them have been there for 15 years or more. When the sale was being structured, Blackridge's acquisition documents included a facility consolidation plan. Bracebridge was on the closure list. They were going to move the work to a plant in Ohio. He kept his voice even. When you reopen the sale process, I want the Bracebridge facility protected. A covenant in the sale agreement. No closure, no relocation of the work for a minimum of 10 years. Another silence. That's all? Kroft asked. That's all. 83 jobs in Bracebridge in exchange for walking away from. She stopped herself. Yes, she said quietly. I'll make sure it's in the agreement. I'll personally oversee the language. Thank you. Don't thank me. Her voice held something he hadn't heard in it before. It's embarrassing how little it costs us compared to what it cost you. A pause. There's something I want to say plainly. What I did in that lobby, calling security, having you removed in front of your son, that was wrong. I'd made a decision about who you were the moment I saw your jacket. I want you to know I'm aware of it. Wesley thought for a moment. I know, he said. That's not an absolution. I know that too. He paused. Luca said you weren't as scary as you looked, that first day, after you left the room. Kroft made a sound that might have been a laugh. Your son is more generous than I deserve. He usually is. The Bracebridge covenant was in the final sale agreement, signed 4 months later at a price 40% higher than the Blackridge offer after 2 independent valuations confirmed what Wesley's engineering assessments had suggested. A business reporter wrote a short piece about the facility protection clause. 83 workers kept their jobs. The plant manager, a woman who'd worked there since it opened, sent Wesley a letter he kept on the workbench in the garage, under a coffee ring from a Tim Hortons cup, where it stayed. Miriam Chase sent him a final letter closing the trust file. She noted, in her precise and unsentimental way, that his grandfather had been right about the long position. She also noted, in a postscript that felt less like a formality and more like something she'd decided to say, that she hoped he and his son were doing well. They were. On a Thursday evening in late October, Wesley was sitting at the kitchen table going over invoices when Luca appeared in the doorway in his pajamas. "Dad." "Hey, you're supposed to be in bed." "I know." He came and sat in the chair across the table, his notebook in his hands. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Luca was quiet for a moment in the way he had before saying something he'd been turning over for a while. "When that lady was mean to you at the beginning, in the big building." "Miss Kroft." "Yeah, she changed." He looked at the notebook. "Not the bad man, he didn't change, but she did." "She did," Wesley agreed. "Why do some people change and some people don't?" Wesley thought about Roland Spares, somewhere in a holding facility. Thought about the text at 3 in the morning. "Think about your son," sent by a man who had never once thought about anyone's son but his own. Thought about Tara Whitlock, who had lost 7 years of loyalty to a man who hadn't earned a single one of them, and had found the courage to do something about it anyway. "I think some people get scared and go further into the wrong thing," he said. "And some people get scared and come out the other side." Luca considered this. Which kind are we? Wesley looked at his son, at the quiet eyes and the notebook, and the way he held himself, watchful and careful, the way Joanna had been watchful and careful, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for a long time. "The second kind," he said. "I think we're the second kind." Luca nodded once, satisfied, and went back to bed. Wesley turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the first snow of the year was coming down soft and slow over Maple Creek, over the garage with its bay doors closed and the hoist locked in place for the night, over the highway that ran south toward Calgary and the glass towers where decisions were made about things ordinary people spent their whole lives not knowing existed. He stood at the window for a while and watched it fall. Wesley Greer had walked into a corporate lobby in a canvas work jacket with his son and a folder full of documents that nobody had wanted to look at. He had been assessed and dismissed and steered toward the exit by men who'd done it 100 times before and expected the same result. He had driven 4 hours because it seemed like the right thing to do, and he hadn't been entirely sure he was right about that until the moment Vanessa Kroft put both hands flat on the desk and said she needed to delay the signing. He wasn't a hero. He was a mechanic from a small town who happened to carry a piece of paper. His grandfather had been careful enough to write 30 years ago and stubborn enough to believe someone would eventually need it. But the 83 workers in Bracebridge still had their jobs. Luca had watched his father show up and not back down, and Joanna, wherever she was, would have told him it was exactly the right kind of stubborn. In the morning, there would be a Jeep coming in for a timing chain, and Luca would need help with his science project, and the radiator in the garage office would need bleeding before the hard cold arrived. Normal things. The kind of things that added up to a life when you weren't paying attention, and to something irreplaceable when you were. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.